Right, so today we're going to talk all about sumps. It's probably one of the most versatile and effective ways that you can actually filter the water on your tank. So what they are a secondary tank that will go underneath your display tank, which will act as a water management and filtration system. So they've got a lot of pros and cons. I think it's one of my favourite ways of doing it, but we'll run through all the different things, the setup, the advantages, the disadvantages, and then you can sort of make a decision on whether you think it's going to be a good idea for your tank. So we'll start with the benefits. So the first benefit to a sump is it gives you a greater water volume to your system. So as you can see, we've got a secondary tank down here, which is usually about half full. So you usually want it about 10% of your actual tank volume you want to be in your sump. So it gives you a lot more stability with your parameters if you've got a larger water volume. So you get more stability, you get more room for error because it dilutes pollutants in your tank. So first benefit, increased water volume on the tank. Second benefit that you're going to get from this is, in my opinion, is you're going to get increased filtration efficiency. So what I mean by that is you've got a lot more room for your mechanical, biological and chemical filtration. So you're not limited to a tiny little space. You've got a lot more space in the sump where you can add all these components in and use them all at the same time. So filtration efficiency is a big bonus to having a sump as well. Benefit number 3 is really one that's really important to me, is the sump allows you to hide equipment. So it gives you room to put your reactors, your pumps, your thermostats, your temperature controllers, everything, even as far as your power sockets, you can put in the sump. So it stops you having all these rat's nests on the outside, and then it stops you having all this junk and garbage in your actual display. So big benefit for me is you can hide all your equipment with them. So the next one, which is a good benefit, is gas exchange. So when you have a sump, your gas exchange will increase significantly. So the reason for that, there's a lot of water movement. So you've got the water going over the overflow, it's coming down through all your plumbing, it's spraying over into your into your mechanical filtration section, and it's constantly moving. You've got it exposed in the cabinet underneath. So with gas exchange, what that means is you're getting more oxygen that's coming into your water column, and then you're getting nasty stuff, carbon dioxide and things coming out of the water column, and it's exchanging consistently. So it's a big benefit to having a sump in your tank as well. And then lastly, it's just the overall ease of having a sump. So they make everything a lot easier. So things like your regular maintenance. So testing your water and things that you need to dose into the tank, cleaning your filtration media. All these things can be easily done in the sump. Water changes as well. You can do them all via the sump, and you're not sticking your hands in your display tank and disturbing the display and stressing the fish out, because you can get everything done underneath, and it just makes it so much easier. Than if you ever having to enter a canister filter, or if you're having to stick your hands in and mess around with a filter inside the actual display. The sump just makes it a lot easier. What I also like about them as well is they're very customizable. So you can have them set out however you want. You can put whatever filtration media you want in there. You can set the baffles to certain places that you want them, and have different size compartments for ideally what you need to have in the sump, or what you want to have in the sump. Right, so let's talk a little bit about the setup of the sump. So this could go down as potentially one of the cons, but they do require a little bit of planning. So you do need to plumb them, and you need to make sure you plumb them correctly. But we'll talk about how the setup works. So first of all, how does the water get down into the sump? So a lot of tanks, if you're having a sump on there, they'll have holes drilled into the tank where you'll have your overflow section. So in this one, I've got the overflow box. So that sits in the tank, the water overflows on there. We've got 2 drains, one's a main drain, and then the other one is the emergency drain. So both of those drains is where the water is going to overflow and come down through the bottom into the cabinet, down through the plumbing, and then into the actual sump. So the sump is divided into several sections. So it's got different chambers in the sump, and you can customize them however you want. So chamber 1, I've got my mechanical filtration, which is the majority of us will have the first chamber as the mechanical filtration. Once it passes through there, it'll go into my second chamber, which is the moving bed filter. We'll do a video on the moving bed filter and why they're beneficial on another time. But I've got a moving bed filter in the second chamber on my sump. There's various other things you can use this second chamber from. So you can use them as refugiums. So where you have sort of an algae colony in there, which will control the algae growth in your main display. Like I said, they're customizable, so you can set them up for exactly how you want your tank to sort of operate. You can use the second section for biological filtration as well. And then once we come out of this one, we'll go into what is the final chamber on my tank, which is the return section. So the return section on my sump is quite big. So I've got a lot of biological filtration, alpha grog, in this final chamber. I've got my reactor in there as well. So I've got my phosphate reactor. I have my heater in this section. And then what you're going to make sure you're going to need to have on a sump is a good return pump, so a reliable one. Don't opt in for your cheap return pumps just to save yourself 50 quid. You don't want one that's going to fail on you, because that can cause a problem if you have got a sump. But you need to get a good return pump. Make sure that it's at the adequate flow rate for whatever size tank you've got, because you don't want an overpowered one that's going to create a massive amount of turbulence when it returns the water into your tank. So the return pump will then pump the water back up into our display, which will then come up again through the plumbing, and then we'll have a return line which pumps the water back into the tank. So again, my return line comes up through the overflow box and then out of these two hoses. But you can have holes drilled in the back, and you can have more discrete overflow systems on your tank, depending on how you build it. When I say it's important to plan these, it's so that you've got an idea of what you're doing with the plumbing. So there's various videos you can find online on how to solvent weld plumbing. It's fairly easy to do once you've got a basic idea of how to do it. But you can then start customizing different things. Like I've got a manifold on here which shoots off from the return pump, and then it feeds a carbon reactor that I've also got under here, which then comes back into the tank, and then that will turn it over and give me some good chemical filtration on the tank. But make sure you plan these well, because if you do, then you've got places for all your equipment to sit and look nice and tidy. And that's one of the main benefits of the sump, is you can get everything under here, so it's nice and organised, you know where everything is, and you can fine tune things as well. So that's why we've got these valves on all the pumps, so we can fine tune the flow rate that's coming down out of the tank and going back up into the tank and through the various reactors we've got in here as well. So I'll give you a little disclosure, a couple of tips on how to make these extra safe. So on your return line, you can get a check valve on there as well. And what that will do is, if your return pump ever fails, it will break the siphon that's created. So when the return pump fails or turns off, it will start to create a siphon, and the water will start coming back down from your main display. If that does happen, it can flood your sump. So if you've got that check valve on there, then obviously it's gonna stop that from happening and prevent you having any flooding issues. Right, so let's talk about some of the considerations and the cons to having an actual sump on your tank as well. So the first one actually correlates with one of the pros, which is gas exchange. And the reason I say that is because before this was an African cichlid tank, this was a planted tank. So I had a massive planted display in there, which had a CO2 system on it as well. And because of the amount of gas exchange I was getting from having the sump, it was drinking CO2 like it was going out of fashion. So I could never get enough CO2 into this tank to get certain plants taken off, like my carpet plants and things. And I was constantly refilling my CO2 cylinders as well. So if you've got a planted tank, a sump for me is a massive con. I'd never run a planted tank on this system again unless I converted it to a canister filter or something, just because it's a complete waste of CO2. The second consideration and con to a sump is just the all-round effort to actually set one up. So sumps aren't very easy to get hold of. You can't just walk into a fish shop and buy a sump. You usually have to get them made by somebody or try and find them sort of second hand on eBay or something. So that can be a bit of a con, is actually trying to find them and the effort it takes with the plumbing, the overflow. You have to have holes drilled on your tank. So really, you're sort of limited to a customized setup, or you have to start drilling holes in the back of your tank. One thing I will say is always make sure if you are going to drill holes in your tank that it's not made out of tempered glass, because if you try drilling a hole in tempered glass, it's just going to shatter to pieces. So always double check that if you are thinking about converting a tank you've already got into something with an overflow and a sump on it as well. Having space for the sump, that's something else you've got to consider. So when you go out and buy a ready-made tank, a lot of them will come with cabinets, and those cabinets aren't sump ready, so you'll have panels running down the middle of them because they're made out of MDF, which won't really allow you to put a sump in there unless you've got a little 2x2 cube and you have a small sump underneath it. But most of the time you're going to need to get your own aquarium stand made, which is going to cater to have a sump underneath it. Another con is that sumps can be quite noisy, so they can make quite a bit of noise, especially where the overflow is concerned. There is ways where you can mitigate it. So there's different ways you can set up your overflow, which are going to mitigate the amount of noise it's making. But I quite enjoy the noise. It's like trickling water. It's like a little waterfall, but they can be quite noisy. You've just got to make sure that you set up that overflow section correctly, so you're not getting a gargling sort of suction noise on the overflow, which you can easily avoid. But they are genuinely noisier than your canister filters and your internal filtration anyway. Especially if you've got certain equipment in the sump. If you've got noisy return pumps and things, they can generate a little bit more noise. The last one, which is a little bit of a pain in the arse, is evaporation rate. So when you've got a sump, you will find that you lose a lot more water due to the evaporation rate. So I'm constantly topping this tank up. I've even got a reservoir on the sump which automatically tops it up now because I've had to do it that often. It genuinely correlates with the amount of flow, the flow rate you've got on the tank as well. I've noticed if I've got more flow turned up on the return pump, then I'll get more evaporation because I think there's more agitation on the water and the surface. But with a sump, you are going to get more evaporation. You're going to have to do more top-ups on your tank as well. So the conclusion of it all, as far as I'm concerned, sumps are the way forward. They're good bits of kit. With the right planning, they're very customizable. They're very effective and versatile. So if you've got the means to get one under your tank, my opinion is if you've got a bigger tank, the sump's the way to go. It's the way forward, unless it's a planted tank. But with smaller tanks, canister filters and stuff tend to do the job just fine. But all in all, good bits of kit. Any tank that's sort of 5-6 foot or bigger, 100% reckon you're going to have to get a sump on them. They're a lot more effective, so definitely the way forward for me.